Is my screen visible?
It was visible. Yeah, it is now.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mir Zahir Abbas. I'm the Operations Manager for Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. Welcome to today's webinar. This webinar is part of CySec weekly series titled Samgacchadhwam. May we all prosper together. The objective is to cover various cybersecurity topics and provide conceptual overview. Let's start with some ground rules. All attendees of the webinar will be muted by default. We will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. In case of any questions, share on the chat window and the speaker will respond after the webinar. We will be recording this webinar and the webinar will be uploaded on CySec YouTube channel so you can revisit anytime later. This is the 28th webinar. The topic today is governance, risk and compliance. This is the webinar we have scheduled for coming week. That's on IoT security, micro-segmentation hands-on session. Here is the list of all the upcoming webinars. Do follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter handle at CySec COE. We are hopeful that these webinars will kindle your interest in the field of cybersecurity. If you wish to access the videos of previous webinar, they are available on CySec YouTube channel. You can see the previous webinar in our CySec YouTube channel. As usual, we will have an assessment after this webinar, which will be kept open for 60 minutes. The questions will be from the topics already covered in the webinar. Those who get 9 or more than 9 marks out of 12 will be given certificate of achievement. Those who are unable to take the assessment will be given a certificate of participation at the end of the assessment. You will also be asked to provide the feedback. Please give your genuine feedback and rest assured it will have no bearing on your assessment. Please provide your details clearly while taking this assessment, as the same will be used to generate certificates. The link of the assessment will be shared in the Q&A chat window. Please note this assessment is open only to those who have participated in the webinar. Let me now take the opportunity to introduce the speaker for today. We have Mr. Siddharth Srivastava. Siddharth is a Deputy Manager in Risk Advisory Team of Deloitte with more than 7 years of experience. His experience primarily revolves around ISMS implementation, third-party risk management, and GRC automation. Key industries served by him are government, oil and gas, TMT, NBFCs, power and energy, and ITES. Siddharth is a certified ISO 27001-2013 lead implementer. Next, I will be introducing Deepti Joshi. Deepti is an assistant manager with Deloitte Cyber Risk Practice. She has 5 years of experience in consulting. Her experience spans across areas like GRC, technical and functional consulting, information security management system, business continuity management, and third-party risk assessment. Her contribution spans across industry sectors such as technology, pharmaceuticals, and NBFC. She is a certified ISO IEC 27001-2013 lead implementer and ISO IEC 22301-2019 lead implementer. I will request Deepti to take over the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Abbas. Thank you for the introduction. Let me just present my screen before we start. Let me know once the screen is up. If anyone can confirm.
Yes, it's working. That's visible.
Thank you so much, Abbas, for the introduction. And thank you, SciSec, for the opportunity given to us, for giving the contribution that we'd like to make to the younger generation coming in. Okay, it's a great initiative, we believe. And thank you to all the participants who have joined in, who are keen towards knowing what GRC is and are keen in making a career in cybersecurity or GRC for that matter. So thank you so much for joining in and taking time out of your schedule. Before we go into the session, I would like to take you through the agenda of today's session. So we'll go through the basics or the introduction of information security first. We'll only cover the parts that are essential for us to understand GRC or will help us understand the GRC in the coming slides. Then we'll move on to the GRC intersection of cybersecurity, which will actually talk about how GRCs plays in the entire cybersecurity domain and how the intersection between various GRC domains is present. Moving on, we'll talk about the drivers of GRC, which is typically people, process, technology. We'll go in depth how these three wheels or the drivers of GRC actually make the entire system. Subsequently, we'll be discussing about how GRC came into picture, what was the need of it in the first place, how, what were the key incidents or events that lead to GRC. So that will be covered. And moving on, then we'll also talk a bit about day-to-day life GRC. So we're not only going to talk about corporate, how governance, risk, and compliance actually, is taken care in corporate sector, but also how it exists in our day-to-day lives also in various sectors. So that will be covered. Apart from that, we'll talk about what are the key components of GRC or what are the key integrants of GRC. Once we know, we'll talk about what is the need for GRC within corporate domain and what are the advantages of a well-managed GRC, how it actually benefits the organization and how it actually, helps with their growth. Okay, or rather contribute to, their growth. Then we'll also talk a bit about the frameworks and standards because we say compliance. So compliance towards what, governance related to what. So we'll talk about framework, standards, and regulations a bit. Then we'll talk about GRC implementation, that how organization actually go about implementing the entire governance, risk, and compliance structure in their organization. Who all are the key stakeholders who are concerned about or have ownership of implementing GRC. So we'll discuss on that. Once we know about majorly about GRC, who are the stakeholders, we'll also talk about the automation part. That rather than having just manual GRC, how it can be automated and why actually automation is required. Once we do that, we'll also talk about some of the leading or at least some of the solutions or platforms or tools that are there in market to automate GRC. So once we have the entire GRC part covered and we know how it came into being, how manual GRC is carried out, what is GRC automation and how it can be done, we'll also talk briefly about the career opportunities in the GRC landscape. So this is about today's agenda. Moving on. So we'll start with information security. We all actually deal with information on day-to-day life. Okay, it's just a matter that maybe we don't really look at it from the perspective that okay, this needs to be secured or protected. but there is information that we handle on each everyday basis. Okay, so information security is nothing but it's just a set of practices adopt that we adopt to keep the personal data secure from unauthorized access or any sort of alteration. Now, when you talk about unauthorized access or alteration, we're talking about having access of that information or data only to the authorized people or only to the audience who's actually intended. So my data should not go to maybe someone else. Right? So that is the whole intent of information security. Okay. Now, when we talk about information security, information is not just available in one form. It is available in various forms. Primarily, like it is in your, digital form, electronic form, print media. Print is there. So a lot of there. Now, even when we talk about the kind of data or information that's available, so that's there's something called private data. There's something called sensitive personal data. I think this is something we've already covered in the previous domains. So, but I'll specifically talk about what are the key elements that needs to be protected when we talk about information security. So, what you see currently on screen is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which we call as the CIA triad of information security, or the threads of information security. These are the three elements that needs to be protected with respect to information security. Now let's look at it one by one. Confidentiality. It's about having the confidentiality is about making the information available only to authorized people. So for example, my credit card number, my debit card number, for that matter, maybe some policy related things should be available only with me, not with anyone else. So protecting that information, the confidentiality of that information needs to be protected, right? Moving on to the second part, which is integrity. Now, integrity refers to the accuracy and completeness of information and information systems. Okay. So, for example, you have a report card. Okay. Report card, you score in when you see your answer sheets, you actually score maybe 80 or 90 out of 100. Let's say you scored a 80 out of 100. But when you receive your report card for a particular subject, instead of 80, the marks that you have received is 85 or maybe 75. So either less or more, it is compromised integrity of the information. So that's what integrity refers to. Availability. Availability is about authorized user should have access to information when required. So, for example, once nobody really looks at the CBSE website maybe throughout the year, right? But when there are board results being announced, that is the you know peak time when the availability of that site is most important. It should be available to the audience, to the students. If it is not available at that time, but is available throughout the year, it doesn't really make a sense, right? So your information should be confident. The confidentiality of your information, integrity, and availability should be protected and ensured. So this is what we call the CIA triad. And to define information security's intent, or the basic objective of information security in one line, we can say that the right information should be available to the right people at the right time. So that's how we cover integrity, confidentiality, and availability. Okay. I hope we're clear with the CIA tried here. The reason we have covered this before getting into GRC is that somewhere this information will help us in the subsequent slides or the coming content. Moving on to the next one, as we talked in the previous slide as well, information can be, in many forms. Primarily, it is in electronic form, hard copy documents, and spoken conversations. Now, when we're talking about protecting the information, the information in electric form can be, customers' personal data, company policies and procedures. It can be any email attachment for that matter, right? And it is important to protect all of these things. When we talk about hard copy, it can be customer KYC, legal documents, HR files. This is about maybe in companies, but if we talk in day-to-day life, your Aadhaar card information. If you print an Aadhaar card, that's your hard copy document. That needs to be protected. Your Aadhaar card number should be protected. It should not go in hands of anyone who can use it in a wrong way. So that is your hard copy document that needs to be, protected. Now the third one is spoken in conversation, and the most critical one. All every organization or every individual actually puts some sort of checks for electronic information and for hard copy documents, right? We make sure that when we're sending a mail for electronic information. If we're sending a mail, we make sure that we're typing the right recipient, right? We're sending it to the correct person. The content is right. We ensure all these aspects. Even for the hard copy documents, we ensure that even if we're sending it by a speed post, we seal the document, we seal the envelope correctly, right? But spoken in conversation, this is one aspect which is taken slightly, in a very lighter way by people, right? Because you go in elevator and you talk about, maybe about your client, maybe about, something that you've done, maybe about something about your bank account number. You're in a call with a call center executive of your bank, and you actually give out details. You might not realize, but you're in conversation. You're revealing your details that you shouldn't be revealing in public. So spoken in conversation is one part that is very, very crucial and should be taken care of. Now, what are the things that we need to take care of? It's a discussion with the customers or clients. It can be your existing client or your a potential client. We should not talk about these clients in public spaces. It can be your vendor name or any commercials for any of the services that you're taking or giving, and internal company matters or organization matters. So these are the three things or the forms of information that needs to be protected. Moving on. Now, we're talking about GRC, which is governance, risk, and compliance. So we would know that if you're, CISEC, it's cyber security related, right? Where it actually falls. So if you see, cybersecurity has multiple domains or multiple verticals, right? One of them is GRC. You have already, attended webinars related to identity and access management, maybe related to cloud, something related to security operations, privacy related, all these things you've already attended. Now, today we'll be talking about something called governance, risk, and compliance, which falls somewhere here if you see on the screen. So, GRC is not just one part of cybersecurity, but also has intersection with all the other domains. So, if you say GRC in itself is a domain and has an overlap with other domains. So, when you talk about IAM, there are a couple of things that you need to be, that you need to govern. There is an access in identity and access management, and you actually govern that access. So that's how GRC actually relates back to each and every domain of cybersecurity. And it's not just a domain that's working in silos. It's a domain that's present across all the verticals of cybersecurity. Okay. So we'll move on to the next one, talking about the key concepts. Now, in the previous sections, we talked about information security, type of information that needs to be protected, and all these things. From here onwards, it's more towards GRC and key concepts that we need to be very clear before we go and understand GRC. So I'll start with the bottom, which is policy. Policy, just okay. So any policy within your organization actually identifies the issues and scope for that particular policy. It's nothing but a high level statement of recommendation for protecting information across your organization. Okay. So just giving an example, if in, let's say in a corporate setup, if I can give an example, I'll give an example of password policy. Very basic, right? And that password policy can have 10 different elements to it. So when you need to change the password, what should be the password length, and all these things. So policy actually gives a recommendation that okay, 1, 2, 3, these are the things that needs to be done by the organization. Okay, so these are actually the rules that are being laid by the organization or the management of the organization, right? So, an example, if you see email or internet policy, in day-to-day life, if I have to give one example, if you go to your college or any place, we have a dress code policy, right? That is also a policy. You go to a library, you need to maintain silence there. You need to maintain certain decorum there. That is also a policy, right? The policy is nothing but a recommended high-level statement for protecting information across the organization or business. Okay. After policy, we'll talk about standards. What you see here on the left hand side of the screen, standards. Standards are nothing but assigned quantifiable measures, acceptable level of quality that needs to be attained. Okay, so there are various, quality related standards available, right? So if you go to any maybe a bakery shop, they have, you must have seen like they are ISO 9001 or ISO something, certified. What is that? That's a standard, that is a certifiable standard, and they're certified to that standard, which means that they comply to certain level of quality, right? So that's standard. Again, standard provides you that guidance for acceptable level of quality. Okay. Now talking about procedures on the right hand side, procedures are nothing but are step by step. It's a step by step process that needs to be followed when you're implementing a policy. So when you say that password policy should be implemented, how it should be implemented is taken care by the procedure document or by the procedure. When you say dress code, organization has a dress code policy. Now, what that policy says is that maybe you need to wear formals. There is a specific, maybe you can only wear Indian wear, or maybe it can be anything, right? So now we say procedure, how it is implemented. Okay. So you can actually mention in that policy that, okay, on these days, maybe in the 4 days or 5 days of a week, you'll have to wear formal wears, but on Friday, you can have casual. So from that standpoint, procedure actually talks about details of it, step by step, that you need to, how you can actually achieve what you have written in the policy. Okay. The classic example is the standard operating procedures that many of the IT people have. So for any of the reported cases that they have SOPs with them, so they can proceed accordingly. Okay. Now, guidelines. Talking about guidelines. Guidelines is nothing but, as it the name itself suggests, guide, something that is guiding you, something that is a piece of advice that is given to you for a particular situation. Okay. It is, again, it's just recommended, not mandatory. Okay. Guideline guideline provided by any of the institute or any of the certification bodies are good to have things, not mandatory things. For example, screening guidelines. So when there is an interview being conducted in an organization, be it any educational institute or a corporate office, right? There are certain things that we need to take care of, right? There are certain guidelines that we publish that there should be at least 2 rounds of interview. First should be with maybe that is technical interview, second can be your HR interview. So similarly we can have guidelines for all other processes as well. And again, to reiterate, guidelines are just piece of advice and are not mandatory. I hope we are clear here, so I'll move on to the next one.
Yeah. Thank you, Deepthi. Thank you for this introduction about cybersecurity, about what is information security, what is the information security triad. In continuation to that, moving forward, now let's talk about people, process, technology, and we are calling it the golden triangle, or what we're calling it as drivers of GRC. Now, before actually introducing GRC, per se, what is governance, risk, and compliance, we thought, let's take a step back and talk about what is actually people, process, technology. And we are saying it is a driver of GRC. What makes it a driver of GRC? Now, as the word says, people, process, technology, three components, kind of intertwined together. All three have to go, in hand with each other. All three have to, kind of, balance out each other for anything to work. Now, I'm not really sure how many management students we have here, but people from a management background would kind of identify or relate to this terminology. It's nothing new. It's nothing, it's nothing evolutionary. It's nothing very, kind of a novel idea, but it's kind of very simple idea, and kind of originated back in late 1960s. People back in 1960s were trying to kind of look into how organizations can be governed effectively, or how can we take complex decisions how can we break complex decisions into smaller tasks, achievable objectives, and then go about solving them. And there were certain people, great revolutionaries, great people, kind of thinking about it, that how do we go about it. And again, the novelty of any idea always lies in its simplicity. If I'm able to explain it to a layman, I think my idea works. So then, people at that time thought, okay, how should we go about it? If we have to solve a particular problem, whom should we place reliance on? So that's when this kind of idea originated: people, process, and technology. Now, why we are calling people process technology and not process people technology? There is a kind of a tonality to it. There is a layer to it, and there is a certain component to it. Now, having said this, if I have to kind of introduce a kind of a platform into my company, let's say if I am the CEO of an organization, if I'm trying to introduce a technology or trying to introduce a new component or a new, and I simply go ahead and introduce that platform without even consulting my people, without even looking into whether there is a business need for it or not, will it be successful? I highly doubt whether it will be successful or not. The reason is because people are at the heart of any particular problem, or people are at the heart of any particular business decision. We do things for people only. So any particular business problem, if it has to be looked at, if it has to be solved, if it has to be kind of corrected in a better perspective, it's the people who should come first. We should have a buy-in from the people. We should kind of consult the stakeholders that we have. We should also look at not only about convincing them, but also trying to get their inputs, also trying to get their thought process. And it's I would take a step forward and say that people should be very willing to kind of contribute and come up with their own set of ideas. Only then my bigger problem, or only then the bigger picture, I would be able to kind of solve. So moving forward in this this golden triangle, as I'm calling it, process. Now I know there is a business decision I need to take. I know I have a complex problem to solve. I have a right set of people, or I have a good mix of people. They are experienced, they know their job, they are very open, they kind of contribute. But what are we actually trying to achieve? We are actually trying to simplify a process, or we are actually trying to implement a process. Now somebody here, some wise person would ask me, what is a process? It sounds a very simple English term. It's a process. Somebody might call you, oh, this is a process. But if I have to define a process, and I dare say I am going to define it, how would I define a process? I would simply call it as a set of actions, or a set of steps that I need to take, or that an organization, or that an educational institute, or that any body in the world needs to take to achieve business objectives. I know, if I take a very very random example, if I have to climb Mount Everest, that's my ultimate objective. Or if I have to earn $1 million this year, it's my business, or it's my strategic objective. But then how am I going to do that? Obviously people would be my contributor, technology would be my enabler. But how am I going to achieve that? What are those steps that I'm going to do, or what are those series of actions that I'm going to do? This is what process is about. That once we have identified the right set of people, once we have their willingness, their buy-in, we kind of go ahead and define that, okay, here are the processes, here are the actual steps that I need to do. And if I do it in the right order, if I involve the right set of people, hopefully someday in near future I'm going to achieve what my business objective is. That's all about people and process. Now why is there a third T, or a technology, to it? We are in 21st century, everything is digitalized, and especially with COVID-19 scenario, everything is virtual. There is hardly any sphere of our human life which is kind of untouched by technology. So how can technology not act as an enabler, as somebody who would act as a catalyst in achieving not just the business objectives, but also any sort of an objective? Let's take an example. I'm a student, COVID-19 virtual world. How do I attend my classes? Smartphones, tablets, laptops. Those are nothing but manifestation of technology. I'm an organization, struggling with my accounts, struggling with my finances. I kind of buy in software, a financial software. So technology acts as an enabler. It helps the organization in achieving the business objectives which have been defined. But then why should it come, at the last? The reason is it shouldn't be a retrospective concept that I introduced a technology and then I'm trying to define my process and identify the right set of people. It would be a disaster. It has to be, I have to find in the right set of people, define my steps, define my actionable items, and then only should go about whether this particular technology is going to support my process. That's point number one. Point number two would be how comfortable, how willing, how enthusiastic my people are in trying to adapt or buy into that technology. Once I have kind of put in all these things onto my pedestal, only then and only then will I be able to achieve my business objective. And that's why it comes as people, process, and technology. And herein I would want to give in a very personal example here, how technology can act as an enabler, or how technology can kind of prove to be disastrous. My mother is a teacher, and she teaches in a school. They used to have an Excel template, where the attendance was captured, the marks were captured, and everything. Owing to COVID-19 scenario, schools were closed, there were online classes, and the school thought that okay, it's very cool now, it's very fancy to have some latest software or some latest technology, and why not ask the teachers and the students to kind of interact through that. Now, is the intent good? Yes, obviously the intent is good, but was the implementation good? No. Why? The reason is, even though the organization, the school here in particular, considered the technology aspect, it did not really kind of thought, oh, what my people say, will they be able to adapt to that or not? And that's where they failed, because most of the teachers were not able to adapt because there were no trainings at all. How would they would be able to adapt if there are no trainings? And that's where that a novel idea, a good thought proved disastrous. Why am I kind of pitching this before even going into GRC? Because as we go into subsequent slide, we would realize that people, process, and technology is at the backbone, is at the heart of governance, risk, and compliance. Moving forward, now, before actually kind of defining governance, risk, and compliance, I thought, me being personally a history enthusiast, I thought, why not let's put a bits and pieces of how GRC was envisaged, how it came into being. Is it something new? Is it an invention, or was it a discovery? Some people kind of thought that okay, there has to be some cool terminologies which the organizations must adapt to, and they thought, oh, let's introduce GRC. Or was it a kind of a amalgamation of business needs and thoughts at that particular point of time? See, GRC is not a new idea. It if somebody comes to you and say that, oh, GRC came into being post 2010, post 2002, post 1990 when India liberalized, no. GRC is an ancient wisdom, I would say. It's nothing new, to be very honest. When we will go into the subsequent slides, we will see that it's nothing really new. We are not going to have some fancy terms just because it's part of cybersecurity and just because it's governance, risk, and compliance. It's basically a very simple term, but I must say it's a simple term which is being forgotten time and again. And very similar to the people, process, technology, it is governance, risk, and compliance. It has to be that way. Now let's take you back to maybe a century back, 1920s. Few people were kind of few wise men back then, and I don't know whether there are history enthusiasts, but you would know that 1920s was an era which was of kind of very depressing to the entire world. The world had just witnessed First World War. There was a Great Depression in 1928 in the US, and the world was struggling. And when we say the world is struggling, and the world is struggling today as well, There are two factors to it. One could be, a pandemic like this, or there could be a financial aspect to it as well. Now, when people at that time thought that, how should we kind of take the world out of this financial problem or financial crisis, which the world war has given, they came up with concept that there has to be a very cohesive approach, when people are doing business. It shouldn't be the case that, there are two departments in my own organization. Those are running on parallel without even communicating to each other. Plus, there is no oversight as well. I am on my own. If I want to, kind of enforce certain rules, and I think we have already kind of gone into that, what are rules, what are procedures, policies, etc. Obviously, those were not that much defined back then. But then when people thought, if I have to, run my business, it has to be on my own whims and fancies. But then that was not the case. People thought it's always better to have a very collaborative approach. It's always better to have an oversight, and it's always better that some wise men should be able to kind of predict what the future lies. Basically, trying to kind of predict scenarios, predict situations even before they have come, or kind of preparing for uncertainties. Now, these words you would keep on hearing, as we go into the presentation. That's how it was kind of decided that a collaborative approach, a kind of a oversight, and together working would help an organization achieve its goal more holistically in a much faster way, and the world would be a better place. Let's take stride. 40 years later, 1960, the world was had improved much. We were an independent nation then. People again came and say that, hey, now we have a people, process, and technology. We have a PPT theory. Can we go ahead and kind of leverage that? Can we learn something from people, process, and technology? And then again, some wise men thought, oh yeah, we can, because see, what is governance, risk, and compliance? At the end of the day, it is about achieving business objectives. And if people, right set of people, defining right processes, using right technology, can help me in achieving that, it's good. And that's how when we kind of looked into PPT, we said it's a driver for GRC. Now, again, jumping 40 years, year 2002. And, I must say that, I would compare year 2002 in the world of GRC enthusiasts to what the year 1914, the First World War, or, 1939, the year of Second World War was. Because it was the year 2002. And in US, there were various financial and accounting scandals done. If I could take, there was Tyco, there was Enron, there was WorldCom. So basically, most of these, organizations had, kind of collapsed. There were financial scams, and one prime reason which was identified in 2002 about these scams were the management per se was not transparent when it came to financial accounting reporting. Basically, what the management of these organizations were trying to do was they were trying to inflate their prices in stock market, and were kind of luring people to buy in their stocks. And when the reality came in, the market collapsed, and the US economy took a downturn. What did US do? US enacted a law called as SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley Act. This goes by the name of the people who kind of enacted this law. US enacted this law in 2002. And what this law was about, that law at that particular time talked only about two things. And then as we go on, we will see that these two things kind of became a backbone for my modern day GRC, and that's when the concept of GRC was introduced. US said, okay, there are financial scandals. What we need to do? First of all, we must hold someone accountable here. We must ensure that the top management of the organization must be individually accountable for any sort of a financial reporting, or rather, I would say, for any sort of an inaccuracy in the financial reporting. And the second, basics mandate of that particular, SOX law was there has to be a set of internal policies and procedures, and a term called as controls, which we would be introduced as we go on. There has to be some sort of internal policies, checks, and balances that has to be there, which the organizations must adhere to, must abide by without fail. And that's where this particular term, governance, risk, and compliance, was conceived. That okay, we have to govern, we have to govern by way of policies. We have to comply to certain laws, be it internal, be it external, and we'll have to, kind of foresee the risks. So that's how GRC came into its modern day avatar in 2002 after, this financial scandals came in. And as people these days often say that, adversity often leads to opportunity, and that's what happened in 2002 as well. So that's where, GRC in its modern day avatar came in. Moving forward, herein, I'm gonna try to, put these three terms together and, give you a very formal definition. I know I have touched in bits and pieces of, what is governance, what might be risk, what might be compliance, a brief history of GRC, taking you through ages of 100 years. But then herein, I am trying to, kind of, put all this together in one slide and, kind of trying to explain it to you that it's not that complex. To be honest, it's not, it's not something very technical. It's very simple, it's very common sense. But, again, people forget, people don't really care that, there is a GRC angle. Now allow me to introduce governance, risk, and compliance as is. What is governance? Typically, governance, means governing somebody. How do we govern? How is our country governed? There is a constitution in India. Very similar to that, there are, sets of policies, procedures, standard guidelines. I think we are familiar with this terms, as was introduced earlier in this slide. So basically, governance is about sets of policies, procedures, standards, guidelines, not only identifying them, not only kind of defining them, but also making sure that they are followed across the organization. Now, so it's very, very kind of, very similar to, set of rules which are there before, the game begins. Both the parties needs to be aware that, there are certain rules. Without a rule, there cannot be a game. Very similar to that, if there are no sets of policies, procedures, standards, if no rules, how would the organization be disciplined? How would the organization know that, these are my business objectives, this is what I have to achieve, this is what the timeline is, this is how I'm going to do? Now, what is risk? We have defined, we have a set of policies, procedures, we know what our business objective is. But, do things really go the way we plan to? 2020 is the biggest example of, what risk can be, and, how unplanned the world could be. Risk is all about uncertainty, but risk is also about, trying to, kind of identify what the uncertainties are and be prepared for that. Risk is, and again, I want to reiterate, is uncertainty. Now, uncertainty to what? Uncertainty to achieve my business objectives. Business objectives could be in a corporate scenario. It could be uncertainty in achieving my goals. It could be, uncertainty in not being able to fulfill what I'm trying to do. Or it could also be a consequence of, not adhering to a policy. Now, if in a game, if I break a rule, if I break up, and rule is, kind of, I would draw parallel to rule to a policy or to a governance mechanism. If I break the rule, what's the risk? I might be out of the game. That's the risk. Very similar to that, and organizations also need to be prepared that, they need to identify their risks. They need to be prepared for that. So risk is all about uncertainty. The third angle, compliance, and very rightly put, it's the third angle. Now, compliance is about, adhering to policies, procedures, set of standards, guidelines, etc. Now, why is it the third leg? The reason is, what will happen, if I don't, if I don't adhere to my sets of policies, or, the set of rules that I have defined? There would be a risk of me going out of the game, or there would be a risk of me not achieving a business objective. So that's what compliance is. Compliance is a kind of a, I would say, a remediating factor, a mitigating factor, which would kind of nullify, which would kind of, avoid my risk. Now, if I am compliant, and I would take it in a very layman language, if I'm obedient, if I follow my rules, also known as governance here, I would comply to them. There would be no risk, but then that's an ideal scenario in an ideal world. In the practical scenario, there would still be risks, but then we would have kind of minimized them. So that's what, we have That's where we have governance, risk, and compliance. So we have sets of policies, procedures, standards, frameworks, guidelines. To it defines what I'm trying to do. What are my goals? What are my business objectives? Risk is all about trying to navigate the uncertain path, trying to be prepared for the uncertainty. And compliance is all about trying to mitigate the risk, trying to adhere to the sets of policies, procedures that we have defined. And again, governance, risk, and compliance, it's a comprehensive, it's a collaborative approach. And again, I would take it back to people, process, and technology, because if I don't have the right set of people as part of my governance body, as part of my risk body, or as part of my compliance body, I would not be able to sustain this. If I don't have right set of people in my risk and the compliance part of my team, I would not be able to kind of sustain this particular concept. And that's where we say, and again I'm reiterating, that people, process, and technology becomes a backbone of my governance, risk, and compliance. Hope it is clear. Moving forward, now, GRC in day-to-day life. Now, why have we kept this GRC in day-to-day life? We just wanted to kind of maybe bring in a flavor that, oh, this is not something which is kind of applicable in a corporate body or in a public sector organization or in a private sector organization. It's a concept, it's a definition, it's a theory, or I would rather say it's an idea which can be and which should be implemented anywhere. Now, if I take an example of an educational institution, most of you would be students. Now, every educational institution would have some sort of a policy, some sort of a guideline. It could be related to what is the time that you reach an organization. What are what are guidelines related to when somebody is taking an examination. Also, at the same time, these policies or these particular guidelines could be internally drafted. So what is the time to reach in a school could be something which would be the prerogative of a school. But how frequently do 10th and 12th boards happen, that is something a prerogative of an educational board, let's say CBSE. So for that matter, that point I'm trying to make it here, that the policies or procedures or standards could be internally drafted, or it could be an external to it. In the similar breath, what could be the consequences in an educational institute if we are not adhering to a policy or a set of rules? If I'm caught cheating in an examination, I could be expelled from my school. That's a consequence at an individual level, at a student level. But what happens if the school is non-transparent in terms of its accounting or its finances? The license of the school to operate can also be withheld. So there is a consequence not only at an individual level, but also at an organization, in this case, an education, the entire educational institute. So we have to be very careful in terms of what are we trying to achieve. We have to be very careful also in terms of what are the various uncertainties that we may have while trying to achieve. Similarly, compliance. Now, there are policies, procedures, there are certain rules that I need to follow as part of my, when I'm giving an examination. Every organization, every educational institute would have some sort of a checks and balance, to kind of implement the policy. When we are giving an examination, there is always an invigilator in the hall, so as to ensure that there is no cheating, there is no malified activity being done. This is nothing but adherence to the examination policy. This is nothing but trying to mitigate the uncertainty of expulsion at an individual level, or the license being withheld at an organizational level. So compliance is kind of adhering to already defined set of policies, procedures, etc. So as you see, GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, is not a prerogative of a corporate body or a corporate structure. It can be implemented, it can be seen and felt in real life as well. Over to you, Deep. Abbas, if you can unmute Deep.
Thank you. Thank you, Sid, for taking us through what governance, risk, and compliance is all about. I hope by now everyone is clear with the concept of what governance, risk, and compliance individually means. Just to reiterate before we move further, governance is all about policies, procedures, and objectives. Risk is about the uncertainties. I'm sorry, those who are not talking, can you please go on mute? Thank you. So governance is all about policies, procedures that we set up, or for that matter, an organization sets up to achieve certain objectives. Risk is all about uncertainties in achieving those objectives. Compliance is all about, complying to the policy that you laid as part of the governance model. Okay. Now this slide, integrant of GRC, it talks about we have already understood what GRC is and how it came into being. We'll go much deeper now into what individual piece G, R, and C has and what all element it covers. We're talking about strategy, goals and objectives, policies and procedures, and structures and processes within governance. So, why do we really need a strategy in place? Right? The whole and sole purpose of having a strategy is to ensure that the organization is clear with the vision, okay, and clearly states out what are the goals and objective of that particular organization, right? And accordingly, based on their objectives, what they want to achieve, they set out the policies and procedures that need to be followed within the organization. You see how everything correlates. It's strategy that needs to be there within an organization. Based on the strategies and goals and objectives, policies and procedures are defined and documented, and the structures and processes are accordingly designed. So every component should complement each other and is taking input from the previous one. Okay, so that's how actually governance is set up. So, if I take an example, of governance, so we usually talk about, IT governance or InfoSec we talk about, right? So there's always management or, a steering committee that actually takes care of what is happening at the ground level, right? Now, how do they actually monitor? That's how they monitor that, okay, these are the objectives we laid out, these are the policies that we have, framed to achieve these objectives. Now let's see whether our people are working in accordance to the laid out policies or not. If not, what are the issues? Where are they non-compliant? We need to check and act accordingly, right? So this is the whole governance part of it. Now, moving on to the risk part. So risk, this again is very, very crucial part in the entire scheme of things. It has components. So, when we talk about risk, we talk about identifying the risk, analyzing the risk, maintaining risk profiles, risk monitoring, and achieving the objectives. Okay. Now let's talk about the individual elements. When you talk about identifying risk, okay, let's, even before talking about identifying the risk, let me just give a brief about what all, at least at organizational level, what all kind of risk that we foresee. There can be a business risk, there can be a non-business risk, or there can be a financial risk that we foresee for an organization. So these are the broadly the categories that we can say exist for risk, kind of risk that we have in an organization. There can be other as well, but these are primarily the three risks that we see. Again, business risk, non-business, and financial. Okay. Now, talking about identifying the risk, how do you actually identify the risk that is there for your organization? So typically what happens in an organization, the most common method of identifying the risk is interviews or discussions, right? In discussions or the brainstorming sessions are, the part where you can identify the most risk. You can just go on, talk about a process and understand that, okay, what all this process is about and where are the risk areas. So that's one most common way of identifying risk, which is interviewing people or having a discussion or having a brainstorming session. Okay. Now, talking about there are other formats of, or ways of identifying the risk. It can be your SWOT analysis that you typically do, which is your strength, weakness, right? So SWOT analysis also plays a vital role in identifying, risk to an organization. Other techniques can be, maybe reviewing the documents that exist the organization. So when you review the documents, now again, depending upon the kind of risk, when you say financial risk, you'll review maybe, the account statements, right? All these things. So depending upon that, the kind of risk you're looking for, the documentation would vary, right? For information. So if you're trying to identify an information security risk, you would not go and check, documents related to finance, right? So that also needs to be, kept in mind. Okay. Now moving on, so to the next one, which is risk analysis. So once you have identified the risk, so giving an example of information security risk, that okay, let's say the organization doesn't have a password policy in place, or for that matter, organization doesn't have a information security policy in place, IT policy in place. These are also a risk. Now, people might question that, why just having a policy document, if it's not there, how can that be a risk? It is a risk, in fact, a very big risk, because it's your policy that dictates what needs to be done. And if you haven't told your people that what needs to be done, they would not know what really needs to be done, and they can do whatever they want, right? So policy document or statement is something that actually, establishes everything in the organization. That's very, very important, and it's a risk if, you don't have particular policy in place. Now, talking about risk analysis. What is risk analysis? So once you have identified a risk, it can be a business risk, non-business, information security related, IT related, anything it can be, right? Once you have identified, you need to know that what is the criticality of that particular risk, right? How severe that risk can be, right? So when you're doing that analysis, it will help you to manage the risk better. Okay, and that's a very key thing to the business here. Now, when we talk about risk analysis, what are we doing in risk analysis? When doing actually starts, it depends on identifying the risk. Once you have identified the risk, you see what is the likelihood of that risk. So when we say likelihood, it's simply the probability of occurrence, that how frequent that risk can occur to the organization, right? So that is the likelihood of risk. Now, when you're analyzing the risk, you also need to take care of the impact that risk would have. So just giving an example, pandemic. Pandemic, the likelihood of happening a pandemic is very, very low, right? It happened now, I think after Spanish flu, which happened a decade ago, or after that, now we're seeing a pandemic, which is COVID-19 or Corona, right? So the likelihood is very, very low, but the impact is certainly very high. So when you're analyzing the risk, you need to be very sure, and you need to you need to identify the risk, you need to analyze the likelihood and the impact of that risk. Okay. Now, moving on to the third one, which is risk profiling. Now, you have already analyzed the risk. When during the risk profiling phase, what you're doing is you simply, if I have to put it, it's high, medium, and low. Based on your analysis of likelihood and impact, how do you rate a particular risk for an organization? Where you'll call it a high risk, medium risk, or a low risk. Okay. So now that's risk for you. Compliance, again, compliance is all about complying to a particular laid out policy, and which can and to the laws and regulations. So when we say laws and regulations, a classic example would be GDPR. It is important for the organization to comply with GDPR, because if they're dealing with personally identified information for the European Union, then they need to comply with GDPR, right? So that's all about governance, risk, and compliance and their key integrants. Moving on. Now we have already kind of talked about it, but to reiterate and to establish it very clearly, we'll talk why do we really need GRC? What is the whole point of governing something, or why do we really need to identify the risk, or why do we need to comply to anything, right? So if you see the picture on your screen right now, it actually talks about all the burning issues that contribute to the need of GRC. First and foremost, you see on the top is lack of effective oversight, right? To clearly establish that one needs to look at all the activities that are happening in the organization, there needs to be a governing body there in the organization. Now that governing body depends. It can be board of directors, it can be a steering committee, it can be a team, compliance team, right? Depending upon the roles and responsibilities and kind of activities they'll be governing, the bodies can differ within the organization. When I say bodies, these are nothing but the teams that we are referring to, right? So first and foremost, lack of effective oversight is the main reason why we have now GRC in place. Secondly is organizational and functional silos. Now, before GRC came into picture, every organization's function, they used to work in silos or, you know, work as a standalone entity. IT would not talk to information security would not talk to any other department like that if they would work. And what happened was there were so many risks or there was a duplicacy of effort, right? That was the main reason to avoid the siloed approach. There was a need of GRC. Then there was a lack of visibility on the what's happening in the organization. There were disjointed strategy and poor integration within teams. Okay, and when all these things happen, when there is a lack of governance or oversight, everybody is working in silos. There is a lack of visibility. One major thing that organization suffers is high cost because with every action of a team or an individual, there's a cost associated. So when you're doing certain things repeatedly in a different teams and they don't interact with each other, definitely there will be a high cost. Okay, and that also led to resource wastage. So these are a couple of reasons why we really need GRC in place. Okay. Moving on. Talking about advantages of well-managed GRC. Now we talked about why we really need, a GRC. Just let me just take you back to the picture itself. See, if without GRC in place, how an organization would really look, right? It looks so devastated and it's very untidy and unkept, right? If you see this diagram, it itself speaks a lot. They say a picture speaks 1,000 words. It does, right? If you see here, it talks about what are the benefits of, having a well-managed GRC. So if you have a well-managed GRC in place, the first and foremost, you'll have an effective oversight in place. Why and how? Because when you say governance, you're establishing a governing body. You have the roles and responsibilities defined. So people already know their job. They would be, monitoring the activities. They'll be governing the activities. So that's why effective oversight will be in place, right? Integrated reporting and analysis. Now that all the functions are working together, right? There will be integrated reporting. It would not be like that, maybe function A is calling a particular risk as a high risk, but function B is calling it, no, it's a very low risk to the business and we don't need it. No. So once these, all the organization, they speak to each other, there will be less, duplicacy of efforts and there will be integrated reporting of all the issues. It can be risk or the compliance status. So when we have the integrated reporting in place, we can see a consolidated and holistic view of the risk and compliance posture of the organization also. Okay, so that's a key. These are the two, key benefits of having a well managed GRC. Other benefits include elimination of silos and reduced fragmentation, etc. Moving on.
Yeah, thank you, Deepti. Moving on and taking on from there, we are now looking into, we have already, kind of come across this terminology standards, but herein, I'm going to throw a new term which is called as framework. And, we would be, briefly looking at not going into the much details or much technical aspects of, this framework, but then we would be briefly touching upon two of the very prominent and, well prevalent information security framework that we have within the world. Now, what is a framework? We have all established that an organization must have some sets of policies, procedures, kind of rules identified. We all know that we need to comply to them to kind of avoid or to kind of lower the chances of any risk. But again, there has to be some sort of a oversight. There has to be some sort of a commonality that okay, if an organization has set this particular rule that okay, my examination can will be conducted twice a year, and there is some another educational institution or some another body which says that no, my examination would be conducted 20 times a year. That's these are two things which are poles apart. So there has to be some sort of a common ground. There has to be some sort of a common good things that needs to be defined, and that's where framework or standards come in. So frameworks and standards, they are nothing but, kind of a amalgamation or, the cumulative set of policies, procedures, best practices, guidelines, which have been put together by leading organizations in the world. And most of the organizations would want to, kind of adhere to them, would want to, kind of align their business processes and objectives to them, and would want to ensure that, howsoever they are running their business, they align to that particular framework. Now, why should I align to that particular framework? The reason is because since frameworks and standards, they are anyways set of best practices which have been put together by, leading thinkers and leading, academicians and, subject matter experts within their field. The reason is, if I'm aligning to those set of frameworks and standards which are internationally recognized and, which are, kind of globally known, not only I'm giving a signal out to, market in general that, okay, I have all my checks and balances in my place. Basically, I'm in control. But I can also give a kind of a confidence to my potential customers, to my potential clients, to my potential investors, that when you come here with whatever problem that you would want to solve, we kind of, will solve your problems because we know our job, we know our business, we have been doing this for a while, and we kind of align and adhere to the best practices. And these best practices, not only, from a functional perspective, not only from a business perspective, but in a long way, if implemented correctly, prove to be very financially prudent as well. That most of the organization, and as we just saw, that GRC, a disjointed GRC, kind of a fragmented GRC, one of the key disadvantages of that is, you know, financial wastage or resource wastage. Not there is no optimum utilization of resources. If I'm adhering to, this well-known framework, well-known set of policies, procedures, I'm not only going to ensure that my business runs the way it is meant to, or the way I want it to be run to achieve my business objectives, but I also make it a very financially prudent by aligning to these frameworks. Plus, having said this, one important thing, and I would want to reiterate, is giving confidence to business, to potential customers that I know what I am doing. It gives me a confidence. Let's say as an individual, if I go out shopping and if there is one particular item which has got some sort of a certification mark on it, it kind of gives me a confidence that yes, this particular product has gone through all the rigorous checks and balances. That's what happens when an organization kind of adheres to well-defined, well-known international frameworks and standards. They are nothing but set of best practices, policies just put together into a broader business perspective so that the organizations can follow it. And now I would be touching briefly upon two of the very prevalent and very common frameworks that we have in the information security or the risk management domain. But if somebody is interested and kind of goes ahead and does his or her own research, they might be able to look at most of these frameworks or standards. They talk the same language, maybe in a different context, but sometimes they talk the same language. So very often is the case that an organization kind of adhering to, aligning to one particular framework is in a way partially adhering and complying to the other framework as well. And that gives a double confidence to potential customers. Now, as a businessman, as somebody who's running a corporate organization, how do I decide which information security framework do I need to align myself to, or which one is the best one out of the ones which are available? Now, this is a very subjective thought or very subjective question. It depends upon it varies from an organization to organization. It is up to a discretion of an organization to kind of align to one or the other. But very often when we are dealing with information security frameworks, we see that these frameworks have their own flavors. Some are built, some are kind of built in a particular way, aligning to one particular industry. So for example, there could be frameworks which might have their tilt towards the health sector. So if I am a health sector organization, I might as well align to that particular framework or standard. There are frameworks and standards which are more aligning to financial data or financial elements. So if I am Mastercard or if I am Visa, I need to adhere to that because that's what is relevant to me. But then there are frameworks, there are standards, there are guidelines which are very region specific as well. So it could be a case that there are certain frameworks which are prevalent only in European Union, or there are certain frameworks which are applicable, let's say, in India only. And if I am operating out of India, should I go ahead and adhere to European Union? I might. Nobody is stopping me. But then adhering to a local obviously makes much more sense. So these are some of the factors or considerations that one might look at when kind of adhering or aligning to the framework. At the end of the day, it is all about you know when you have adhered to a framework or when you have aligned your business process to that particular framework, it's all about not only just adhering but kind of subsuming that framework within your business as if your organization was anyways running that. So it's about implementation as well, and as will go forward, we will look into few of the implementation considerations as well. Now quickly moving forward, touching upon two basic frameworks that we have. One is COBIT, and as you can see, Control Objectives for Information and Related Technology. So this is a very widely known, a well famous in enterprise risk management or information security framework that we have. It's a worldwide framework, globally recognized framework. Now, I would just say one line about it, and that kind of sums it up. It was basically conceived as an idea, as a thought that the IT side of the business must align to the actual business which is running on the ground. So my IT should act as an enabler to my business rather than obstructing it. So it has a set of its own principles, guidelines, which makes IT much more integrated with the actual business objectives of an organization, thereby helping the organization achieve its own strategic goals. One more important aspect of COVID as an enterprise risk management or an information security framework is not only it helps in kind of integration between the IT and the business, but it also lays down the ground for improved auditing. And when I say improved auditing, I always know that okay, I am aligning to a framework, I am adhering to it, I have all the checks and balances in the place. But is there an assurance? Is there an overall oversight? Is somebody looking at the way I am doing, whether I am doing right or not? This particular framework, if an organization aligns to this particular framework, it kind of mandates that not only you have a very strong alignment within IT and business, but you also should have a very strong internal audit mechanism. And that internal audit mechanism obviously should be independent of your business side of it, so that it shouldn't get influenced by business and IT, and it rather acts as somebody who is trying to preserve the overall integrity of the organization. It acts as somebody who's looking into the processes and making sure that whatever processes are being followed by an organization, those in a way are in the way of strategic direction as well. Maybe I would request the people not speaking to go on mute, please. Thank you. Moving forward, so this was about COVID. Moving forward, again, the second framework that I would be briefly touching upon is COSO. COSO. So as the name says, it says Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission. Now, if you would recall, I had talked about the year 2002, which was a very revolutionary year for the risk practitioner and the compliance practitioners, because it was then that this novel idea of GRC as one single unit was conceived. It was the same year also, and as I mentioned that SOX as an act, Sarbanes-Oxley Act, was enacted in US. Why was that act enacted? Because there was financial frauds, there was corporate fraud. Organizations were not transparent, in terms of their financial reporting. And SOX as a law was legislated. But SOX has had its own, limitations. It kind of mandated that, okay, you need to do. But then how one should go about it was something which was missing a bit. And every organization kind of interpreted on its own. COSO as a framework tried to fill in that gap. So basically, it's a framework that helps an organization kind of, avoid any sort of a compliance fraud or any sort of a financial fraud. It has got, a set of various components, and there are almost, 17 internal controls. Now, when I say internal control, what is a control? And if I would want to define here, obviously we know control as part of compliance is a mitigating factor. There is a risk. How do I mitigate a risk? The process, the step that I'm going to take to mitigate the risk would be my control. COSO as a framework laid emphasis on not just the control, but the word here is internal control. It kind of laid emphasis on the fact that an organization must develop internal controls. So when I say internal controls, its people must be directly involved in the design and the implementation of the control, and at the same time, its people must be kind of well equipped and trained to operate that control as well. Thirdly, very similar to COVID, it kind of enhanced the auditing part of it as well. That when I am doing things the right way, I should also make sure that there is an internal oversight on things that I am doing, and I should be transparent enough so that if tomorrow I face an external audit, if I face a legal audit, I can safely say that all my checks and balances, all my processes, all my controls which I have implemented, are running as per the way they were designed, and there are no loopholes, there are no frauds, there are no uh, problems in my organization. So this was all about COSO as a framework. Now, having talked briefly about COBIT and COSO, I would want to highlight that these are not just the only frameworks that we have. There are many other frameworks, and people who are interested might do some research on their own. But yeah, these are the few very prominent and prevalent globally recognized information security frameworks that most of the organizations kind of align toward you. Moving forward, now we have talked about people, process, technology, and how it acts as a driver to GRC. We talked about GRC, what are the various integrants of GRC. We also kind of understood that if not implemented correctly, or rather if not implemented, what are the various problems that an organization might face, and what are the various advantages GRC can have on the organization. But how do I go about implementing GRC? I understand that people are at the heart of it. I know that I have my processes in place. I know that technology should be there to kind of support me in achieving my business objectives. How do I kind of integrate all that together, and how do I implement my GRC? So this particular slide talks about some critical success factors. It talks about few key ingredients that any organization should follow if they want to kind of implement GRC in a holistic way, in a way that not only benefits them in the short run, but it kind of subsumes within an organization and becomes their own in the longer run as well. One key component right at the very outset is trying to know yourself. The organization before even embarking on the journey of GRC must know itself first. It must know that what is the business area that I'm dealing into, what are the various things that I'm doing as part of my day-to-day job, what are the key processes that I have defined, or what are the key processes that I'm trying to put into place. And also the business should understand, the corporate should understand what are the people that supporting that. So an organization must know itself also before embarking on a journey for GRC. The second important component is again a framework. And as we just discussed, most of the organizations kind of align their risk management process or their governance, risk and compliance activities to a framework. Why? Well, simply put, it's a low hanging fruit, because you already have a set of defined, globally recognized policies, procedures, step by step implementation guidelines as to how you should go about it. You just have to understand them and put them into the right perspective depending upon what your business objectives are. A framework in it on its own might not be cannot be directly implemented. It has to be interpreted and implemented in such a way that it leads to achievement of the business objective. So a right framework, a selection of a right framework is one of the key ingredients, one of the key critical success factors in terms of GRC implementation. Third is, you have to engage, and again herein I would want to take you back to the people aspect. You have to engage the right set of people and the right set of stakeholders, when you are implementing GRC. Now, governance, risk, and compliance is for everyone. It directly or indirectly impacts everyone in the organization, but not everyone should be a part of the decision making process. The organizations must be very strategic, you know, when they're trying to identify who are my key stakeholders, or who are the right set of people that I need to engage with, that I need to have a conversation with, that I need to involve when I'm implementing GRC. It could be subject matter experts within their individual. So every organization might have its own verticals and might have its own internal departments. So it could be subject matter experts from all the departments. It could be a people from the information technology, the IT team. It could be people representatives from the finance team. Basically, the idea is involve everyone, make sure that GRC is kind of embraced by each and everyone in the organization. That's one of the critical success factors. But when it comes to decision making, be very vigilant that you identify and engage only the right set of people who have a vision, who know their business, who know their job, and who come with some inputs to provide you. The third approach I would say is one of the very critical factor that has to be that is there is taking a staggered approach or a pilot based approach. Many a times in organizations, and this is typically for larger size organizations, they kind of think that, okay, I have a framework, I have a technology, I know my people, why don't we go ahead and just launch it, just implement it, and starting, let's say, 1st of December, and just roll the plan. Very often and not, this might work in some scenarios, it could, but very often not, it has a high chances of failure. Because GRC, again, having said this, it's not a technical, it's not a it has got its own technical flavor, it has got its own automation part, but it's a concept. It's a kind of set of best practices that has to be put together, and then only it will work. So it has to be implemented, or it has to be kind of embraced in a step by step manner only. Otherwise, there are chances that you have implemented GRC, you have implemented right set of people, but it's not giving you effective results. So one key factor when implementing GRC is organizations, or whosoever is implementing GRC, is take a pilot approach, take a staggered approach, implement it in small chunks. Let's say implement it for one particular department or one particular service line. See what are the benefits that you are accruing in the shorter term, and then kind of enhance the scope. Final thing about or the final point that I would want to touch here is picking the right GRC platform or a tool. In subsequent slides we would talk about how the automation of GRC has come into picture, but since we are in 21st of century, and as I said, technology touches everyone's life, GRC is also kind of embraced and by technology. It's not that GRC is done outside in a paper pen mode. Obviously you can do that there as well, but then there are various tools, platforms, automation methodologies which are available in the market which support your GRC process. Once you have kind of identified, defined what are my various processes and how I'm going to implement GRC, and I've engaged right set of stakeholders, it becomes imperative for you also to pick the right GRC platform or the right GRC automation methodology which would suit your organization's business, which would suit your business processes, and which your organizations are willing to adapt to. Because as is often the case with tools or automation technologies, is it's the people who must adapt to them, then only it becomes a success. So yeah, these were few of the GRC critical success factors.
Thank you, sir. Now that we have understood what GRC is, what are the critical success factors for implementation of GRC, we need to understand who are the key stakeholders for GRC. Okay, within an organization also there can be multiple people who can act as your stakeholder for GRC. You know, I would request the participants to please go on mute. Okay. So the first and foremost, from the governance part, we talk about board of directors and management. They're responsible for looking the governance part of it, and hence they are the key stakeholder and the first and foremost in your GRC stakeholder list. You need to address. I'm sorry, can I request the host to please mute the audience? Moving on to the next stakeholder, which is your regulators. So the reason we call regulator as your key stakeholder is that to ensure compliance to certain regulations, right? It's the regulatory body that monitors your compliance. So when we say GDPR, there's a regulatory body that will look after your compliance, organization's compliance, right? So that's why regulators are also a key stakeholder within your GRC scheme of things. Within the organization, various teams that are key stakeholders are IT team, finance team, and legal team. Why we call IT team as a key stakeholder? The reason we call it IT team or a IT department rather as a key stakeholder is everything. As you know, we have reiterated multiple times in the previous slides as well that nothing in today's era is untouched by technology. For every single thing we rely on technology, right? Today when we take this webinar, we're relying on WebEx, we're relying on our laptops or desktops or mobile phones, right? So and it's important for it's within an organization, it's important for IT department to ensure compliance, that all your systems are compliant to the regulations and are not violating any regulation. And they need to ensure basic things, that software licenses, right? So that's why IT department is also a key stakeholder. Apart from that, your suppliers and vendors are your key stakeholders. Internal audit team, right? The reason we say internal audit team is also a very key stakeholder for the simplest reason that they're the ones who provide you or the organization with the independent view of a current state. When I say current state, it is with respect to obviously a particular regulation or a particular standard, right? So that's why it's important that we address the concerns highlighted by the internal audit team also, to ensure that GRC is well managed. Apart from that, your customers or your interested parties or clients or your potential customers are again a key stakeholder in your GRC program. Moving on, now we talked about how GRC came into picture and how it was initially done into Excel. So not necessarily you need you need automation to carry out your GRC activities, but automation or technology definitely acts as an enabler within GRC implementation, right? So it's important, it's good if the GRC program is automated, and it has its own set of benefits. So GRC automation helps the organizations to minimize the time they take to identify, prioritize, and respond to various changes in the risk and compliance landscape, right? So that's the reason most of the organizations prefer automation. They prefer certain solutions for GRC, right? We'll discuss about the solutions in detail in the next slide, but right now we're highlighting the need of automation. And the reason we need automation is to ensure that the organizations are taking less time to identify, prioritize, and respond to the changing risk and compliance landscape. Okay. Also, automating the GRC ensures that there is appropriate remediation and risk treatment that is there for the identified risk. Yeah. So, just to go quickly through it, there are various advantages listed here for your reference. One of the key advantages of having an automated GRC is real-time risk identification. Now, nothing really beats, no other advantages beats than this particular, advantage of GRC or automating the GRC, for the simple reason that today everyone wants to have a quick look. So, nobody really has that much of time that you're working in Excel, a heavy Excel. You work on it, you send to someone and then wait for their approval. And just to know that at what particular stage, in case there are 3 or 4 approvals required, at what particular stage that particular Excel stuck, right? Simple example, if you have a tool, you upload the portal on a Excel, you upload the Excel on a portal or on a GRC solution, right? You can quickly, just see, log in and
Request
see
all
at
to be
what
on
stage
mute.
it is.
Request all to be on mute. Hello. Someone is talking in the background. Request.
Thank you. So, as I was saying, real-time risk identification is the key advantage of automating the GRC for the sole reason being that the less time that it takes to see what is the progress. If there is like multiple level of approvals that is required for a particular activity, right? You would just simply by a click, you would know at what stage it's stuck, rather than sending a mail to one person, then that person referring you to another person, right? So that's a very basic example. Other advantages include accountability and transparency, integrated risk and compliance reporting. Now, integrated risk and compliance reporting is one major, concern for all the organization, and that's the main reason behind organization opting for automating the GRC, right? Because it's always a good idea to have a holistic view of your risk and compliance landscape. Where do you stand in terms of, compliance to GDPR or maybe compliance to any other regulation? That's always a good idea to have an integrated reporting. Other advantages include audit logging, reduced cost, improved strategic planning and decision making, and so on. Moving on. So when we talk about GRC solutions, or when we talk about automation, GRC solution tools or platform, they're very crucial in automating the entire thing, right? The entire GRC. So if we talk about GRC solution, what we really need to ensure when we are buying a GRC solution, on when we are considering a particular GRC solution. First and foremost, obviously the cost factor comes in for an organization, depending upon the size of the organization. A small organization wants to automate a GRC, GRC, but doesn't have that much of, money or funds, right? So that is, and you cannot afford to buy a big GRC, a mature GRC solution, right? So that is one key factor that you need to take into consideration when you're evaluating or considering a GRC solution or tool or platform, right? The cost is one major factor. Moving on to the next one, which is on-premise or SaaS. So nowadays, most of the organization are preferring to go, when we say SaaS, it's software as a service. So most of the organization, or what we call as a cloud in layman. So most of the organizations these days opt for SaaS-based solution, but on-premise also has its own set of benefits. Depending upon what is the requirement of your organization and what kind of resources you can have, you can decide upon whether you want to have the on-premise solution or a SaaS solution. The next consideration that you need to take is GRC tool is customizable or its customization capabilities. So although most of the GRC solution providers or the vendors, they give you really mature GRC solution which are aligning to various regulations, standards, and best practices. But it's all no matter how good a solution is designed, every organization has its own flavor and need the customization as per them. So maybe someone there are organizations that call a gap of finding, you know or anything of that sort. So even as simple as something, a terminology may differ. So to ensure that you can accommodate that simple change of terminology, you need to ensure that whatever GRC solution you're buying or you're evaluating is customizable. Now the fourth one is this one is the most crucial one, user friendly. right? Any solution that you buy needs to be very user friendly for the sole reason that it's the people who are going to implement and further work on your GRC solution. If the solution is not user friendly, it will have further repercussions because people will not be willing to work, and it might further hamper the productivity as well and the GRC program.
Kumar Singh. Rajkumar Singh. Rajkumar. Rajkumar. Okay, you can continue. I'm expelling him from the meeting.
Thank you.
I'll continue.
Sure. Thank you. Moving on to the next one is vendor OEM support and training. So vendor or the original equipment manufacturer, which is your OEM, it's important that they provide sufficient training and support when required. So that is also one important thing you need to consider that, okay, when you buy a license or a solution, for how long this vendor will support you with the implementation or in case there are any defects or any issues. The next one is elements of a mature GRC framework. So as I said, most of the GRC, solution providers actually align their solutions with the leading standards or, best practices. So that is also a key factor that you should keep in mind when you're evaluating a GRC solution. Now, the seventh one, and again, a very important one, is the reporting capabilities. The GRC solution that you're considering should be able to generate reports from various sources and give you a holistic risk and compliance view of the organization. Moving on, these are the key. I'm sorry, can you please go on mute? Thank you. So, talking about the GRC solutions tools available in the market, what you see on the screen are the few GRC solution, which includes RSA Archer, ServiceNow, IBM Open Pages, Metrics Team, SAP GRC, Logic Manager, Risk Connect, and Oracle GRC. So these are the few GRC solution available in the market that organization can opt for depending upon the various factors that we discussed in the previous slide. However, please do note that this is not an exhaustive list. We're nowhere saying that these are the only tools or solutions available in the market. There's a plethora of GRC solutions available in the market. It depends upon the need of an organization and a lot of other factors. You can pick and choose the GRC solution that suits best for you.
Thank you, Deepti. This is probably the last section of our presentation about GRC, and I would rather call it icing on the cake. Is the reason I call it is because now we have understood what is GRC, kind of placed it, how it's placed within a corporate setup or in the day-to-day life as well. We understood various concepts of GRC. We understood how it kind of evolved over a period of time, and we also understood how should we go about implementing benefits, disadvantages. But what's here for you? Let's say people, students, people who are listening. What's in here for you, especially for students? This is the slide that that kind of talks about that how one can make GRC or a governance, risk and compliance his or her profession within the the bigger information security domain. So this particular slide talks about what are the various sectors or avenues related to job opportunities, related to trainings, internships that GRC has to offer within the bigger ambit of cybersecurity or information security. I would rather talk about the right hand side of the slide first, which is careers in GRC. I would request audience to go on audience on mute, please. Thank you. So careers in GRC. Now we understood that GRC is a concept. It has to be implemented. There has to be buy-in by people. GRC also has a technology component, where we understood that okay, it can be implemented using platforms, tools, softwares available in the market. So if you look on the right hand side of the screen, these are the various opportunities, or these are the various specialized roles that are there in the market, that are there in the corporate industry, that are there in the world, wherein a professional trying to enter the world of cyber security, and especially within GRC, can make his or her career. Now he or she can be a tool or a platform expert. Let's say he or she can have expertise, or can get trained on one particular platform, do the certification and implement that platform, kind of enabling that organization by implementing the platform. Or that particular person or student or a wannabe professional can also be take up more of a functional or a business manager role as well. He or she can understand, oh, this is how we need to define the process. These are the business objectives. This is how I need to put in the process. These are the various controls that needs to be put in. And what is the framework that I'm aligned to? Now the framework, as I said, is a set of best practice. Now it is up to an organization to see how best it can implement and retrofit the platform into their own organization. Herein, the risk and control specialist, or the governance, risk and compliance consultant, or I would say the security compliance specialist, can come into picture. They can put their consultant hat, they can put their thinking hat and say that, oh, I know this is the framework, I know the organization, let me try to put them on the same pedestal, and this is how it can be done. In the very similar way, a platform guy, a software person, can also say that, okay, now you have defined the processes, now you have defined the policies, procedures, let me try to automate them in the best possible way, using the best possible tools and softwares available, and also implement in such a way that it is user friendly. The employees of the organization are able to adapt to it in a very smooth way, and it becomes a day to day activity for them, that they're very happy trying to adhere to a policy, to come trying to implement a control, and it becomes that effective and that simple for them. So that's where any particular professional can enter into the GRC space within the bigger information security. And again, taking you back to the first slide, wherein we were trying to place GRC within the information security. GRC is the backbone of any sort of a process. As Deepthi mentioned, in identity and access management, we have access. Access is people at the right time. Right people should have right access to the right data. Now, where have I defined what's the right data, what is the right people? It would be my policy, and policy stems from my governance. So you see, governance, risk, and compliance lies at the heart of cybersecurity. And let me tell you, there are a number of opportunities within the GRC ecospace in the cybersecurity domain. Briefly, going to the left-hand side of the screen, GRC certifications. These are, couple of the well-known GRC certifications which are available in the market. These are few of the leading ones. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list, in no particular order. We have just tried to put in few of the leading certifications that we have. People who are interested, may kind of do their own research and see that, how they can benefit. But again, it all ties down to one common thing that people, very often forget is GRC is a simple concept, but it has to be implemented in a better way. It has to be understood, embraced, and it has not to be forgotten. So that's what we have. I think we have reached the end of the presentation. So thanks a lot for your patience hearing. We are open for any sort of questions.
Thank you, Siddharth. It was a good session. I think I have posted some 5 questions in the WhatsApp group. You can answer those questions.
Thanks, Abbas. So I see the first question is about what are the impact if the data is in cloud. Okay. Now, at the end of the day, for me, obviously, where the data is, obviously, makes a difference to me. Whether it's on a local server, and sorry if I'm trying to be a bit technical, but if, to me, it doesn't really much matter, whether the data is there in my local server or it's there in the cloud. At the end of the day, what matters to me is, what's the sensitivity of the data. what is the data, and God forbid, if there is a breach, if there is a data leakage, what would be the impact of on the person or the organization to which that data belongs to. Now, specifically referring to cloud. See, cloud is anyways provided by third party vendors, or it could be a local cloud, or it could be a cloud, kind of an organization might have its own cloud. The impact remains pretty much the same if the data lies onto my system. I need to identify, you know what is the criticality of my data. I need to identify what would be the impact if that data is stolen, or if that data is not available. And again, tying it back to the information security tried, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, I would want to kind of put a dollar value that somebody, let's say, gets into my system, unauthorized access, gets, kind of takes that data and sells it onto the dark web. Not only I would have a reputational impact, but then there could be legal repercussions as well for me. So I need to look into all those aspects, and I will look into all these aspects, and these are nothing but my risks that this data particularly possesses. Okay. I see the next question is, can you please tell about the risk associated with assets? Now,
Okay.
yeah, Dipti, please go ahead.
Sure. So, and the question is asked for both tangible and intangible. So, there are various risks that are associated with the assets. It can be, data loss related risk. It can be malware, ransomware, or as simple as unauthorized access. So, if someone is who's not supposed to access your data or rather your simple as your laptop, right? That is a risk. And all these things which I mentioned fall under a security risk. Now, risk is not only about security risk. It's also, it can be a financial risk also, right? So any risk that is emerging out of uncontrolled IT cost, that is also risk. Now, we talked about in the previous slides, we talked about license compliance when we were talking about IT as a stakeholder, right? So license compliance, that is also a risk, right? In case you found non-compliant, there can be legal implications also. There can be financial implications of that risk. So that's also a risk. Apart from, if we talk about operational risk, it can include something related to your outages, right? So sometimes a website is not available. That is also a risk to the organization, right? Because we talked about it. The availability is also one important aspect of information security, right? So if the site is not available, that also is an operational risk. Other than that, there's a risk related to business continuity, etc., etc. One thing which I would really like to highlight: all these are very like a tangible risk, right? You can put a dollar value to it, as we say. But something that you can't really put a dollar value to is your reputation. So brand and reputation is something which is a very intangible form of risk. In case you lose on your reputation, that's very difficult to gain back. It's difficult to gain back that confidence. So that's an example of intangible risk here. The next question is, what role does ITIL have in GRC?
Yeah, Dipti. So I would want to take that up. See, ITIL, and if I look at it more from uh, flow perspective, typically has four phases of ITIL. So it talks about certain best practices that an IT organization must follow. So it starts with defining the strategy, then moving into the design part of that strategy. Then once the design is there, how should we go about implementing that strategy? And then how do we operate? So it's ITIL typically has a kind of a four-layer structure or a flow, which is strategy, design, implement, and operate. Now, if I would want to draw parallels between ITILs and GRC, and if I stretch my neck out and say that yes, there could be parallels, I would say that strategy is nothing but governance. What am I strategizing? I'm trying to put a strategy to achieve my business objectives. I'm trying to develop a GRC readiness. I'm trying to assess the current maturity of my organization. I'm trying to come up with best practices. I'm trying to come up with best procedures. That this is how I need to operate. So somehow governance ties back to the strategy aspect of ITIL. Very similar to that, the design part of it and the implement. I would take it together. Now, when I'm designing what I have already, kind of strategized, I need to be very mindful of the fact that, what is the context that I'm, putting that design into. Also, I need to be cognizant of the fact, and that's where, I would want to bring in the risk element is I should be, I should have that foresight that whatever I am designing I should have a foresight to kind of minimize the uncertainty. So I would call the risk part kind of pertaining to the design, a bit of risk part of GRC, kind of mapping back to the design portion of ITIL. The third leg or the third cycle of ITIL talks about implementation. Now, when we implement, obviously, we have strategized something, we have kind of designed it in the best possible way. Now we are trying to implement it. Now, as part of an implementation, it's only when I put the pen to the paper, then only I would know that whether my pen is working fine or whether the paper is durable enough or not to hold the ink. So it's only when I implement the process that I have designed, I would get to know whether it works or not. So the implementation portion has a bit of risk part to it, but the implementation portion also pertains to the compliance part. Because when I'm implementing my quality design processes, again, having had that foresight, that I should be, kind of wise enough to put in certain mitigating factors as well. That okay, if I design this particular process in this particular way, there might be this risk, but how do I overcome that risk? That also has to go as part of an implementation. The final leg of ITIL is about operation. And needless to say, operation is a bit of both compliance and policy. The reason I say compliance and policy is as part of my day to day activities, I will be adhering to what is already designed and implemented. But then, as part of operations, there could be, there is always a scope for improvement. There is always continuous improvement. It would also throw me back certain feedback that, okay, you have designed, you had the best of intentions, you designed your processes well, you implemented it in the best possible way. But then there could be retrospectively, looking back, there could be, certain pain points or, certain loopholes. How do I fit that? I take those feedback as part of my operate mechanism and put it into my strategy for my next phase. And strategy is what? Updating the policy procedure guidelines. So that way, I would fit strategy, design, implement, operate cycle of ITIL into the GRC aspect. Okay, the fourth question that I see is, can you suggest some open source GRC tools for hands-on practice? Well, unfortunately, we cannot. Uh, we really don't endorse or kind of say that, okay, this is the tool. Uh, if whosoever has asked the question, feel free to, do your own research. But, obviously, we really won't want to, kind of endorse or suggest any sort of a platform for GRC. I think we have laid the ground in terms of GRC and the benefits that automation brings into. So, but we would want to leave it there. Uh, the final question I see is, could you please explain about SOX and why organizations implement it? Well, one of my favorite questions. I would I would say, why do organizations have to implement SOX? It's very similar to why does India or the business in India have to follow the GST model that came in 2017. It's because it's the law of the land. It's something which has been kind of provisioned by the government there, and we know that the laws made by the competent authority in in our case the government of India, or let's say in the SOX case the USA government at that particular point of time, they thought that SOX is best suited to kind of prevent and detect any sort of a financial fraud, and that's why they enacted it as a law. And needless to say, any law when enacted and when implemented, has to be abided by every law-abiding citizen. In this case, since it was a law related to corporations and big and organizations, it has to be adhered. So it's more of a that the government has decided something, and it has to be kind of followed in the best possible spirit. Now I see could you please explain about SOX? So I think I've answered the second part, why organizations implement it, because it's a law. It has to be implemented. There are repercussions. But then, what is SOX? And there is also a kind of a small angle to it, that organizations were willing to kind of implement that. Two reasons to it. No, SOX as a law talked about two particular aspects, and I'm sorry if I'm being a bit technical here, but that's what the question demand is. SOX as a law was delved into two aspects. One was about since it was dealing with financial fraud, it dealt with financial transparency. First of all, it mandated any organization within US at that particular point of time that whosoever is the top management of that organization must individually certify the accuracy of the financial statements. So basically, if I'm submitting my balance book or my ledger statement, if I am the chief financial officer, I would request yeah, thank you. If I'm the chief financial officer of the organization, I must individually put my signature to that, saying that I individually certify that this is accurate and this is to the best of my knowledge. What are the repercussions? The repercussions were, it had criminal angle to it as well, that people could go in jail if they kind of reported false data, if they reported false financial data. What it ensured? It ensured that people should be very focused about what they are reporting, but they should also be very conscious of the fact that whatever they are reporting should tie back to the data it is supporting. That was the first provision. Second was, it SOX talked about development of internal controls, that not only the organizations must individually certify the financial accuracy of their data, but they must also kind of look into development of certain internal controls. It's not that, okay, I as a CFO just signed saying that this financial book is correct to the best of my knowledge, but I must also develop certain checks and balances which SOX mentioned as controls, which will ensure that not only me but the entire organization follows that checks and balance, and I look into the effectiveness of it. If that is the case, obviously my overall run book or my overall financial book would be accurate and will be transparent. And if somebody is very interested, these two provisions were section 302 and section 404 of Sarbanes-Oxley Act, enacted in 2002. Now, why did organizations implement it? Obviously, it was the law of a land; they have to implement it. But there were certain very obvious benefits of SOX as well. That if I am reporting on my financial data, and if I'm being transparent, it not only says a lot about me that okay, I'm being honest and open. It also gives my investor a confidence. After having seen multiple scandals, my investor knows that okay, here is an organization which is very open, which is very transparent, is adhering to SOX. I must do business. And initially, they were a bit of trouble. They were trouble. Organizations were finding a bit difficult to implement SOX. But then over a period of time, SOX was embraced like any other, or I would say much better than any other law. So that's what SOX and its small history is about. Thank you. Abbas, I don't see any further questions, so I would pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Siddharth and Deepthi, for a wonderful session. Okay, and we didn't know the time has gone from, it's nearly 7 o'clock now. Okay, it was a wonderful session. We are very thankful from the SciSec for conducting such a wonderful session. Okay.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Abbas. Thank you so much. We really appreciate, that SciSec made us part of this initiative. Pleasure was all ours. And a bigger thank you to the audience who joined in, and not just joined in, it's almost 7 now. So thank you for sticking around. Thank you.
Thank you, Abbas. Thank you, everyone.